Welcome to the Major Project Podcast, your inside look at the high-stakes world of billion-dollar projects.
Welcome to the Major Project Podcast. I'm your host, Orion Matthews, and today we're talking about one of the largest oil and gas greenfield developments in the world, the $20 billion West Qurna 2 project in Iraq. My guest is Tarun Gohel, a project controls leader whose career spans from piping design in the field to senior leadership roles on mega projects across the globe. Tarun, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Orion, and it's a pleasure to be on the show. Thank you.
Just to help the audience understand this project a little bit and not to get any insider ball, but what were you guys doing? Like, why was it so expensive? Could you talk a little bit about just the major scope of that project and what you guys were setting out to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is a public project, and I think you can find obviously a lot of information nowadays online, right? It was one of the largest mega projects in the world in oil and gas industry. It had some proven reserves in billions of barrels, and basically the entire project scope included, building the upstream processing facilities, which included, your upstream, refining facilities, your accommodation camp, drilling the wells, bringing the oil from the wells to the upstream processing facilities, processing the raw crude, getting the right products out of it, and then finally shipping the raw crudes out of the country. And obviously whatever the gas, associated gas was, that also included a processing of those gas in terms of making sure that those gas is used in generation of electricities. It also had its own power plant, because when you execute such a large project with mega scale, right, you have to have your own. So if I'm not mistaken, I think 200 to 300 megawatt power plant, combined cycle power plant was part of that. There was a large accommodation camp, like about 3,000 people accommodation camp was being built. So it is a massive footprint, connecting maybe over 100 or 150 wells, I think, bringing those small gathering lines to the central processing facilities, building these mega central processing facilities, and then storing them, and then finally shipping them. So it's an entire program,
Yeah.
It's a huge scope.
And so then it was also a global program, right? So you were in the UAE, the facility was in Iraq. Were there other major areas that were involved in the project as well?
Yeah, we had offices, like you said, in Dubai. I think the company where I was working, they also had offices in Moscow in Russia. So they were also controlling a lot from there. We had most of our major contractors, they were from different countries. So they were not local contractors. So we had a contractor from South Korea, Turkey. We have contractor from Pakistan. We had, many different countries. Like we had contractor from France, basically. So there were many different hubs where the project was being executed. But I think in terms of the core administrative function was being performed in Dubai. So it is a global effort, actually. It's bits and pieces are happening all around the world. So design is being conducted in Italy, for example, right? We have contractors from different part of the world. So it's a very a diverse, multicultural efforts going on in different hubs around the world.
And you had fabrication happening in other areas as well.
Fabrication, some in South Korea, some outside of the UAE.
Wow. And you were part of the project control team at that point in Dubai, yeah? So how did you manage, what would be your advice to someone, say they're setting up another mega project? I guess from your lessons learned, knowing that you're going to do fabrication somewhere and maybe design in another spot, what's the advice for folks that are executing these mega projects to kind of keep all those global pieces moving together if you're sitting in a project controls team? Because sometimes it feels like you're that module is getting built over there. You're just sort of I'll hear from them and they better have it done. And maybe, I don't know, is that good enough? Or do you have some tips there that you would advise?
Yeah, absolutely. So the key point I would highlight in terms of the project controls efforts, right, is to, as I mentioned to you, you need to have a sufficient planning activities done upfront before even you start executing. So I think this is where the core things happens, where you really define the project control requirements, right? Which because you want everybody to work on the same template, same format, same information needs to be exchanged. So you don't want you don't want the information coming from a fabrication yard in South Korea and different work breakdown structure than what you are reporting, right? So it's like a absolute core is like define your project controls requirements, define your work breakdown structure, cost breakdown structures very early on, and make sure that you impose and everybody follows that, right? All the contractors are aligned with that. So we used to have this very great document we used to call project controls requirements. It's like a 200-300 page document. Every contract we signed, it was embedded into that document. So
Nice.
It ensured that so we first of all, we embed the document into the contract. It means we make sure the contractor signs on them, that you are going to follow what we are telling you, right? And also another important thing is that before you kickstart your project, during the kickoff, you go through that document with them and explain them, right? So it's not like just dumping document. It's like training them on the document, because we all need to understand that document itself is not going to do the work, right? People are going to do the work, right? Document cannot walk. Document cannot do the concrete cubic meter or something, right? In the field. People are going to do the work. So document is as good as, people are aware of that, right? Otherwise, there is no point. So I think we also learn these lessons, that we do a lot of documentations work. We make sure the contractor signs on the document, but then no one is trained on them, right?
Yeah.
It's like, it's a wild west. There is document, then you get the report, which is not what you wanted. And then when you ask and say, oh, planning engineer was hired 3 months ago, he wasn't there when the contract was signed. So he has no idea what the document says.
or why it matters at all.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I almost think of it like, I've never thought about it this way. And I want to circle back and talk about work breakdown structures a little bit, because I think that doesn't get a lot of attention. It might be something but did you include the work breakdown structures in the contracts then as part of that 200 pages? You were like, this is major scopes and a breakdown of those things? And you will report based on that?
Being a client on such a mega project, I think you can only break down your work to a certain level only, right? So you have to give a contractor flexibility. So we normally break down the work breakdown to a level 2 or 3, right? This is where we decided this is our control point, where we as a client want to control, right? And then we let the below level breakdown. So like breakdown below 3 and 4 level or 5 level, we let the flexibility built into that, so that contractor can build whatever they want, break it down. But because for us, defining everything from the day one, it's going to be challenging, right? Because you're talking about billions of dollars of contracts where things will change very rapidly.
Yeah.
So we have a high level control where we want to control. We define those critical points, and then we let the contractor manage below those critical points. But we make sure that those below level rolls up to the higher level, right? Which is very, very important.
Well, and I guess I'm sort of thinking through this here, but it almost seems like there's 3 levels that I heard. One level is you're contracting with someone and you don't put anything in there about expectations, really, particularly around reporting. And then you kind of have to deal with it outside of the contract. You sort of have no leverage to get what you need out of the contractors. And then maybe there's this level 2 where you've included your requirements, but you actually haven't gone over it with them. And so you have a stick, but you sort of have an untrained recipient. And so they will eventually maybe comply, but it's going to be a lot more work and painful to get them there. And then you have this third level that you talked about that is really cool, which is you use the contract as a meeting of the minds and really try to explain and get them to understand why those requirements are in there. So you have this alignment, using the contract as an alignment tool, since you're going to use it as an enforcement tool. And then that's a really great approach, I would say.
Absolutely. And also I wanted to add one more point, actually, very important, just came to my mind, is that normally the contracts are, in general, I'm not saying in a particular case, but in general, the contracts are viewed as a penalty mechanism, right? The contracts are drafted in such a way to penalize the contractor, right? So this is a general kind of consensus among the construction industry on a large project. So what we learned over the years that I think in order for you to execute the project successfully, you have to change that mindset. So I always give example to my colleagues that if you, for example, if you punish a small child, right, you always see the opposite reaction, right?
Yeah.
Because small child is not going to listen to you. But if you incentivize, and if you say, for example, if I give my son a candy, and if I ask him to do something, he will do it, right? So I think the contract mechanisms we have been dealing for a long, long time is a penalizing. So contracts has a liquidated damages clauses, right? And then punishment clauses that if you don't do this on this time, you're going to pay such number of penalty, we'll withhold your bonds. What we learned that if you want to impose the project controls requirements on them, and if you want them to follow them, because every requirements you put them comes at a cost, you have to incentivize them. So first of all, make sure that they price for it. So whatever the requirements you're going to give, you're going to ask for them. You asked in the contract document itself to make sure you price for them. What are your efforts for your project controls activities, right? Because it doesn't come, nothing is free, right? It comes at a cost. Second thing is when you have those clauses, and even though after putting all those contractual terms, after all those things, even the contractor doesn't fulfill those requirements, then instead of penalizing, you incentivize them. So like safety culture, right? Nowadays around the world, safety is more incentive culture instead of penalizing culture. So you don't have any clauses to penalize, but if you achieve certain man-hours safely, we will incentivize you. We will give you 1% of the contract value as a bonus or something. So I think those kind of mindsets really encourages contractor to deliver things you really want them.
I think that's great advice. And it seems like, I know that animal training went through that. There's a number of fields that your first instinct is to use punitive approaches, and you get these negative results. You might get some out of people, but generally you have these sort of incorrect behaviors that manifest in different ways. And so I think that the game theory is sort of teaching us that the carrot approach has a little bit more finesse to it. It's definitely not as easy to pull off, but the results are quite a bit better. And it's pretty, if game theory for these major project contracts, because you obviously have different people with different incentives, and you still want to line everybody up. And I think the contract's a great sort of pivot point vehicle to try and set all of those pieces in motion and make it a fun game rather than a dangerous game that you can only get hurt playing, but you have to play. So that's really great insight. And maybe shifting a little bit along these lines, be interested to talk about risk with you. So we kind of touched a bit on contracts. So that's, getting the right data out of your vendors, having the right contracts, a little bit of planning is important. Now that you're in the project, like how do you make sure that you've identified risk? And particularly in this Qurna project, obviously it's risky to execute the largest project in the world. It might not have been the most stable area. There's just a lot of potential risks just in those two things alone, notwithstanding all the other stuff that goes with a project. What would be your advice, and what kind of learnings did you have from that project on risk?
Yeah, these kind of projects are very risky projects, right? I mean, we all know. So whatever you think could go wrong would go wrong, right? So it's that kind of analogy we have. So there are many different ways you can tackle this. So when it comes to a risk, right? So one of the things what we have learned, and I particularly learned, is when it comes to risk, defining the risk, what risk is. I think everybody just jumps on, starts defining, that like defining the risk, quantifying them. But I think the first and foremost, you need to ensure that whatever you are going to define, your risk area, right, it has to be very realistic. Because, like for example, there is going to be rain in South Africa, right? And you put that on a risk register, but how is it really impacting your project? It is not going to impact your project, right? So very project specific, and you also have to be very realistic because risks are everywhere. And if you try and quantify the risk, your project value will be double, right? So there has to be some sort of reasonable approach where, what are the critical risks which are really going to impact your project, right? So this framework of risk defining is very, very important. The second thing is the methodologies, right? Everybody has a different understanding of risk. And we sometimes, like, some people think risks are positive, some people think risks are negative, some are very neutral in terms of the risk. So that is also one important thing, is that early on you have your risk management plan, which really brings everybody on board in terms of the language, in terms of the terminology you're going to use. What do you mean by negative risk, right? What the risk means to you, right? When your project is impacted by $2 million, is it risky on a $20 billion capex, or is it like a... So
Yeah.
there has to be very, very threshold, right? If something is going to hit you by the $10,000, is it that risky on a $1.5 billion contract, right? So those are the real things which you need to make sure that everybody's aligned before even you start defining. And then you have normal process, right, where you conduct your risk workshop, right? Identify the risks very early on by collecting different parties' input. Then you do qualitative risk analysis, quantitative risk analysis, right? Build the mitigation plan. And, there are a lot of risks which we were faced with in terms of geopolitical risk, right? Having material issues, right? Suppliers not delivering products on time or material on time, contractor delays, which is one of the biggest risks, right? So one of our approach was that we early on, before even execution, we will list out all the critical risks to the project during the basic design and concept design. The earlier you define, the more control you have. You can do a lot of things about it, right? And then obviously you define, you quantify them, and then you put together some sort of risk mitigations plan. What also we learned is that, there are a lot of times where risks are defined, but then no action is taken later on. And I think it's not that people don't want to take an action. I think the one critical thing was missing was the trigger, right? Okay, there is a risk that, a contractor is going to delay. But at what point of time you should take an action, right? You're going to incentivize contractor is the action. When are you going to incentivize? How long it will be delayed before you take an action? So I think every risk must have a trigger, right? When you got to have an action in place. Because if you don't have the trigger, you don't know when to take an action to mitigate it, right? So that was one of the critical things we learned. And obviously, we use a lot of different kind of tools on our projects, like Monte Carlo simulations, Primavera risk analysis. We quantify. Everything comes down to a realistic picture of a risk. So you don't want to have because if you quantify every single risk which is going to impact you with the highest maximum impact, your project will never get executed, right? So there are risks you have to accept. You can't do business without a risk, right? So you need to really clear pathway for what you're going to accept as a business risk, right? And then be more realistic, because at the end of the day, when you perform your risk analysis, you're going to come up with a contingency for the project, which is which you're going to factor into your estimates, right? So those are the approaches. But yeah, in summary, there is a lot you can do. We faced with almost all the major risks, okay? And it's not that we prevented all the risks. There were risks where we couldn't do anything about it, right? And I think where we couldn't do anything about it, one of the root cause was nobody knew what the trigger was when to take an action.
And I guess dive into that trigger a little bit, because I'm sure people are thinking now about their risk logs going, I wonder if we have triggers. Was it like you had the risk defined, there was a trigger, but it was confusing? Who pulls it? It's almost like SMART goals, right? Specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. It's like, is there a phrase for that for triggers where it's specific, quantifiable? I mean, because I could see, because people don't want to trigger risks, or at least certain people are going to be opposed to a risk triggering. How do you write those triggers to kind of self-trigger without the politics that might go into them?
Absolutely. It's art and science. So there is no single perfect way. There are two types of triggers, right? The one trigger is where that now risk is happening, risk is occurring now. So that is one trigger. And then risk is now ongoing, at what point of time you take an action to mitigate it. So that's a mitigation trigger, right? And every mitigation trigger must have mitigation owner assigned, right? Who is going to take an action on that, when the action will be taken. So let's say something needs to be done in the month of October, for example. So did it happen or no, right? And then you review them quarterly or monthly, whatever your frequency you have decided in the beginning of the project, those actions are really taken or not, the trigger really occurred or not. So it's a very challenging, it's a lot of subjectivity involves there, but I think it all comes down to expert judgment, right? Where you say, for example, a contractor is going to be delayed. We have very big risk the contractor will delay this project by 3 months. Okay. And the mitigation actions you have decided is that you're going to incentivize contractor to bring some equipment earlier by paying some more money, right? This is the mitigation action, right?
Yeah.
So when do you take an action? So when the contractor is actually forecasting delay for 1 month, you take an action. When the contractor is already forecasting 2 months delay, you take an action, right? Or when he is forecasting 3 months, you take an action, right? And if you take an action, what kind of actions do you take, right? Okay, let's negotiate with your suppliers and crash the schedule, right? By paying more for the resources, right? Is it feasible or no? So there are A, B, and C, right? If it doesn't work, then what else can we do? Can we do something in parallel? Can we bring the equipment and at the same time do the foundation work? And then maybe just wait for equipment to be delivered, and then put it onto the foundation or something like that. So there's a lot of subjectivity involved, a lot of judgment involved. You just have to be careful that whatever the terminology you phrase in terms of the trigger is understood easily by everybody, right? Then only the action can be taken. Otherwise, it's really difficult.
And getting along those lines, the risk and triggers can face this hidden variable problem, which I think shows up in sort of progress. And when you go to contractors and you're asking them about that delay, like, hey, how's schedule doing? And sometimes it'll go, everything's on time, everything's good. I'm 6 months behind. And you've been tracking, you've been asking them, you've been sending the notes. Everything seems okay. And then everything goes from green to red. Do you have any advice on people setting up projects? Maybe if there's things in the pre-planning stage you could do, or how do you approach that, or what advice do you give to folks?
Yes, so we have done a very good, actually me and my team, I mean the entire team with whom I worked, has a great learning from this. And what we did is we implemented like you hear the word auditing, right? In the finance and all, we implemented a project controls audit. So project controls audit is like you say, right? The contractor is showing everything on time, right? But then you don't know the true delays because they are going to show you what you want to see, right? They're not going to show you what the true delay is. So we had this tendency that every quarter we go to a major contractor's offices or facilities where the work is being executed. We audit them, and we as an owner, we take their schedule, and then we build our own internal realistic schedule. And by doing this, we discover that contractor has already 2 months delayed on the project. Not what the contractor, because always contractor schedule comes with a constraint on the finish date, right? Which is in the Primavera, you put a constraint, the date won't move, right?
Yeah.
but then you have to build a realistic picture from your own end. If you ask contractor, can you give me your realistic scenario? Like what is your P10, P50, P90 dates? They will never give it to you because they don't want to show any delay. So here, you as an owner's representative, you as an owner's project control professional, right? You have a responsibility to go and find out the truth, right? What is the real delay? So it doesn't happen that 1 month there is 0 delay and the next month 6 months delay. So we implemented this on almost all of our large projects. We used to go there, we perform a thorough audit, and we don't perform a thorough audit. So we perform audit in terms of how the contractor's project controls management structure is. Are they really staffed very well? Do they really have a good culture in terms of showing delays and all? And then at the end after doing all those organizational stuff, we do our own internal forecasting. And we bring those data back and we show to our management and we show the true delays. And we ask them to have a meeting with the contractor and start taking action early on. Because what contractor shows is not aligned with what we as a owner's representative feels like. And there is always, like, when we go to these kind of meetings, there is always back and forth. Contractors say, oh, no, your assumptions are very wrong. And then we say, okay, prove me with your data or whatever your backup you have, right? And this is where the dialogue starts, and we go into more detail. And the more detail you go into that, the more things gets revealed, right? And it's a lot of learning for you. And then at the end of the day, after 2-3 months of brainstorming here and there, the true delay comes, and contractor says, okay, we are not delayed by 3 months, which you are saying, but we are only delayed by 2 months now. So we're happy to show 2 months delay in our report. It's pretty fascinating.
And were you on some of those? I guess, like, I'm imagining 2 people on an airplane flying to South Korea to do an audit, and you're going to show up. Was it hostile? How did you set those up to make them productive and sort of get your hands dirty on the factory floor? Like, what? Maybe just take us a little bit of story time through one of those.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is all goes back to my project controls requirements, right? So when we set up a project controls requirement, we put open-ended statement that owner has all their rights to do an audit whenever we feel, or at least quarterly, or whatever the frequency we decided there.
Yeah,
we have all our rights. And obviously, we as an owner will give you pre-audit notification. So we just don't go and jump there, and just start. So we tell them, okay, like a month in advance, that, we have, these are the dates. Please let us know if those dates are okay with you. We're going to come there. We're going to sit with you. You will show us your engineering deliverable register, right? You will show us all the deliverable status to date. You will show us every deliverable, if it has been issued for review, if it has been issued for construction, what are the dates, everything, right? You will show us your technical document register. You will show us your procurement register, which will have all the purchase order listed. What is their status? Are you in the inquiry stage? Are you going through a commercial evaluation? Are you going through a technical bid evaluation? And when do you expect to place the PO, right? And then we have a construction detail quantity list, right? Which is every activity broken down by certain high level quantity. Because very early on, you don't get a lot of quantities. So we just go very high level in the beginning, where we define like cubic meter of concrete total, running meters of the cable length for the electrical, and piping inch meters or inch diameters, things like that. We go there, we tell them that this is all we are going to take from you. We are going to review them. We are going to match every deliverable ID with your Primavera P6 ID, and we are going to see that those dates are truly reflected in your P6, right? And if not, we need to see the realistic scenario. What is it going to do? And then you build those. It's an effort-intensive job. It's not an easy, obviously.
Yeah.
Take their own schedule. But the important thing is you make sure that they are aware that you have your right, which you put into the contract itself, and give them sufficient notice that you're going to go there, sit with their project controls teams and owners project controls team, and we are going to discuss everything one by one, right, in detail. And sometimes you don't need to go into much detail, but when you see the area of concerns, you start going into detail, saying that, like for example, if you're buying a centrifuge pump from Europe, the delivery is 52 weeks. And now we as an owner, we also deal with those vendors, and we get a quote from them, and they said the delivery is going to be 80 weeks, for example. And then we say, contractor, how can you tell that you have 52 weeks delivery when they gave us a proposal for 80 weeks of delivery? So what is your basis? So show us the document, right? Do you have a confirmation? Do you have a signed PO with the vendor? Are they really going to deliver that? What are the potential risks there? Whether they're going to deliver on time or no? So there's a lot of effort goes into that. It's not an easy job, but I think if you do once in a quarter or maybe like twice in a year, it is still manageable. And this will really give you better control. This will, as an owner, you sitting in your offices, you have no control over what contractors are doing, and you have no idea what is happening. I think this is an opportunity for you to go and learn, as well as gather the right information, so you can give your management the right amount of information, which can allow them to take a lot of early actions, which can prevent the true delay happening to the project.
Well, and I imagine if you're talking with their project controls teams and meeting with them, you probably find both resistance, but also allies. Maybe you make some friends, and then you have this connective tissue between you and a contractor to kind of marshal things forward? Because ultimately you are both shooting for the same goal. So there might be maybe out of those audits that also is helpful in other sort of non-technical ways, but culturally helpful to connect with them, and they know that what you're really aiming, for example, and just have cut through all those different layers of communication and just get straight into it. That's really good advice. I wanted to shift then, because we just talked about getting data from the contractors. And then you mentioned that maybe you go to do audits. I know that you do reporting cycles. I'm curious to talk a little bit about how you present on one of the largest projects in the world. What's tips do you have for anybody listening that's about to get into one? How do you present to management? How do you present to ministers potentially that you might have had to talk to? Like, do you have any presentation tips and stories for project controls folks?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when you are dealing with such a large project, the reporting, is a very strict and very, structured requirement, and it's a lot of effort, intense, driven, right? You have so many various stakeholders on a particular project like this. We have a government, right? We have a head office. We have contractors. We have external parties who are depending on our reports. The program team who depends on what you're doing within the project. The management, for example, in the Moscow office or in other part of the world. Reporting is very challenging. I think the important thing we can do is systemize everything, right? And it's all a lot of data-driven activities. If you don't have the system set up in the beginning, I think you're going to suffer a lot, right? Because you have to collect so much amount of data, and then you have to analyze them and report the right matrices, right? So like earned value management systems, you have to report on a weekly or monthly basis, right? And then you have to report your cost, actual cost, plan versus actual. And then we also had a different type of contracts. Like we had a lump sum contract, time and material contract. We had a unit rate contract. So every contract has a different reporting mechanism. And then you have to, at the end of the day, you also have to summarize everything at the project and program level, right? So it's a great efforts driven. I was fortunate enough to deliver presentations to a very large audience, sometimes even to executive leadership team of our company, and a few times to the Minister of Oil, for example, in Iraq.
Wow.
And a lot of government executives in Iraq. So it's a pretty fascinating, and some of the things which I learned is I went to one of the presentation and I completely bombed it. I mean, people didn't like it. So, for example, I had to deliver something and I just straight away delivered whatever things I had to deliver without thinking what the context was, what the culture was. So some of the things you have to learn is that whoever you're going to present to, either it is a minister or very high level executive in your company, I think you have to understand what is the context, right? Why the information is being asked, why you're presenting this information, right? And also, if possible, you have to do a little bit of research about who you're going to present to. So always think about what the other person is, because when we go and present something, we always go with the mindset that, oh, everybody knows what I know, right? But you have to keep a mindset that you're going to present what you know to somebody walking on the street, right? Some guy walking on the street who has no clue about what the project is. So it's like explaining to your mama what the project is. So sometimes you have to have that kind of attitude with you, where one of the most challenging role is to simplify information as much as possible. And sometimes there is a kind of gray area where you too much simplify, then, they ask for more detail. And you have more detail and they say, this is too complicated for me to understand, So there is a kind of balance, and very subjective balance. You don't know what is the right amount of information you want to deliver. So when you deliver to, for example, ministers and, executives, these kind of presentations, it's very important. You do a lot of research in advance, understand the context, and simplify the information, because you have to understand the opposite person has no involvement in your project, what you're going to tell about, right? They just want to know if the project is going well or not, right? Or they just want to know what are the critical areas where that person needs to take an action. So if you're presenting to a minister of oil, and if your project is 2% behind the schedule, he wouldn't mind, he wouldn't bother about it. But when it comes to finance, where we say, oh, this project has a variation order for $50 million, which you have to approve, then he's very interested into that. He will go into detail and say, okay, $50 million, it is going to come to my desk for approval. Then I want to know every detail, what that $50 million is going to be, right?
Yeah.
So those are the things which you can focus on.
I mean, in terms of the presentation of knowing your audience, I think that's really excellent advice. And then I guess I would just ask for a couple other tips, because I know you're a speaker. You've done some really good presentations over the years. And do you have any advice for people just kind of getting started, maybe that are listening to this going like, I have my first presentation with an oil minister. I don't want it to bomb. How do I how do people get started with becoming good? I mean, do you advise project controls people to like take public speaking courses? Like, what are some like simple tips for people to get better at presenting?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm still scared to speak publicly, So it's not, I mean, it takes a lot of time and effort to realize what you can do. I mean, yeah, project controls is a very vast area, right? And you can go in any direction. And some point of time, your career will grow to a level where you have no other option but to address a large audience, right? Where either you are going to deliver a presentation or you want to deliver something to your executives. And I think in today's world, we all know, right, in social media and internet and everything, the communication skills and speaking to a large audience, it's very, very important. So there is no way around it, right? If you really want to grow your career, if you really want to be a professional in your area. So some of the advice I would say, like personally, I'm still very scared, and I still like sometimes I avoid talking to public, but I have given like one or two very large presentations in the public. It gave me a little bit confidence. Before starting, I was very, very, not very comfortable. But what I learned is that if you're going to deliver something, I think if you have a right mindset, you have to train your mind a lot. You have a right mindset. And I think whatever you're going to deliver, always try to be delivering in a positive manner. So, I mean, say the things as it is, but be in a positive environment. And what from a lot of public speakers. So I watch a couple of public speakers videos like TED Talks and all. And it all talks about, it's not about what you are going to deliver. It's about how you're going to make people feel about it, right? So that is very important in terms of the public speaking, is that you're not going to deliver what you know. You're not going to dump what you know on other people. You're going to make sure that it helps them, right? So it helps them. It it feels good about what you're going to deliver. So it's all about getting people feeling about what you're going to deliver, right? So that is a very important thing. And when I'm on stage, sometimes I forget and I digress and I just, want to dump all my technical knowledge, whatever I have, to the people. And then at the end of the day, people are just looking here and there and they have no clue what I just said. Some public speaker has a very good advice, and I would give everybody the same advice, is that what you're going to deliver, divide them into 5 or 6 different pieces, key messages, like what you really want to say to the larger public. Let's say 5 or 6 key messages, and behind each message, build a story. Because when you tell the story, your message goes very well. So I think, and I learned this recently, even like in my first lecture, I didn't learn this, but now I'm getting more and more realization when I'm getting more and more opportunity to speak publicly, is that people will remember the stories. So tell the story, make a point. Tell the story, make a point. Tell the story, make a point. I think if you follow this format, I think it will go very, very smooth. Even though like very short story from your real life, fictitious story, it doesn't matter. People get engaged very, very thoroughly when you tell them a story. So yeah, I mean, some of those advice, and don't worry if you're afraid. I mean, it's practically everything is normal when you're afraid. Everybody has the same feeling. Like I have the same feeling when I go in front of the large audience, But as the time passes, and the more you practice, I think at some point of time, you're going to realize that, now you're very confident. You're going to, and again, make mistakes. Don't worry about making mistakes. If you're scared, just go there and just stand there. It doesn't matter. But then it will improve your confidence when you go next time, because you know what happened to you in first time, right?
Great advice. I have one last sort of question, or two final questions for you here. The first is to kind of wrap up. I feel like our conversation was almost a sales pitch for project controls teams. And by that, I mean, I think an executive listening to this right now might have a better sense of the scope that could have been had they had a bigger project controls investment potentially. You can't really do audits when you're running a skeleton crew. You can't really create 30-page contracts and have meetings with 120 different vendors and create alignment if you're running a team of 3 project controllers for a $5 billion project. So I'm curious on your thoughts on that. I feel like of the projects I've been involved with, the ones that have maybe strong, and it's always hard to advocate for funding for project controls. It's an overhead function and it's an easy one to want to cut. But I feel like the stuff we talked through here could add so much value to some of the projects I've talked about that maybe it's just a good reminder that perhaps running a skeleton crew project controls team can hurt the project in ways you might not even think of. I'd be curious about your thoughts on that.
No, it's a great question, and I think very valid question. So like not all the projects can afford a large team. Because we had a very large project, we had like 24 members in project controls, right? So it's very impossible on a small scale project. Every project has their own unique challenges, right? And like smaller projects, you're only talking about two people, working on a project. And I think in those kind of projects, when the timeline is 1 year or 1.5 years, right, you really cannot afford to do an audit and things like that, right? You really have to rely on a lot of intuitions. But I think the more experience you get with this, and the more those kind of skills will come to you, where you become an auditor, even though when you're sitting in your seat. You don't need to go and watch the contractor. The information comes to you. You will immediately catch that there is something wrong here, right? There is a true delay. So I think the more you learn, the more you practice day on day, you become more experienced project controls professionals, and then you can spend very least amount of effort. You don't need to go and sit in the contractor and have 3 different resources to do an audit. You can really learn this, and it will improve your skills in terms of doing things very fast, right? And with the current AI environment, right, knowledge is there like vast lake, so you can pull those knowledge and do this. And small resources doesn't mean you cut a corner, right? Obviously, you have to do everything what you define, but I think the important thing is if you have smaller team, you make sure the requirements are very defined accordingly. That these are the base minimum things you're going to do on a project when you have a smaller team, right? So on a large team, on a large project, you can define whatever you want, right? You're going to have weekly reporting. You're going to have, because everything at the end of the day comes at a cost. You're going to have cost and schedule risk analysis. If you have a smaller team, in your project controls requirements, put that you will not have any CRA or SRA done. Cost schedule risk analysis done, right? You will only have barely identified the risks, and then you monitor them as and when. So lower your expectations in the beginning, but make sure that the critical expectations are there, so that there is no impact to so what is absolute critical to the project is there. Like you have to have monthly at least reporting, right? You don't want to cut a corner on that.
Yeah.
Right? You have to have, level 3 schedule, obviously, in a proper format, right? You have to have a proper cost report done at a monthly basis, but some sort of on value, because on value is also time and cost intensive. And every project, the given amount of resources, you build the requirements accordingly. So you fit to the project's need. I have a lot of projects. We don't spend a lot of time on that. I have like projects between $5 to $15 million. We only have 1%, 25% allocated to those projects, but we focus on the right things, what we need.
That makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned AI. I'm curious, are you seeing impacts with AI in the space? Do you have any
AI is
thinkings
impacting
on
everything.
that?
AI is impacting everything. And I think it is going to impact the project controls in a big way. There is a lot of things are being built into the pipeline by different players. What I can say that it will still not take the core skills of project control away, right? But it will really help to boost productivity, being a project controls, So for example, analyzing the report, right? Before you have to do manually, now you can just dump the large amount of data sets and ask the AI, and it will give you an analytical summary or things like that. But I don't think it is going to take away anybody's job in terms of project controls, because you still need to have, planning done properly, right? You still need to have people communicating with the contractors, doing a lot of things which really needs interpersonal skills.
Yeah.
I don't think,
I agree with you there. I don't think they're going to take our jobs. But I think you could see some acceleration there. Similar to sports, you can watch a simulated football season all day long and people want to see real people do it. But when you look at what the athletes do in terms of I ran into a data scientist once who was a data scientist for a pro athlete team. They hire their own data science people and they use AI now and things to like make better athletic performance. So I think what we'll see is maybe people getting better at their craft faster, but still it's people. That pillar, the people pillar you talked about in the beginning, is always going to be there. And I guess my last question for you is kind of an advice question. If we shift gears, we think about maybe I'm a student, maybe I'm a pipe fitter, and I'm thinking, boy, I would really love to have the experiences that Tarun just talked about. I'd love a career in project controls. What would be your advice to someone that's maybe a student or early career about how they could get into this space or what things they might want to study?
That's a good question. One of the most important thing comes to my mind is the curiosity, right? You're curious about learning anything, right? It's not just about project control. So currently I'm in project controls, I'm learning about accounting, I'm learning about AI. So I think the most important thing is be curious, right? Be curious. And whenever I want to learn something, I always ask my question. Like, for example, I'm learning accounting, right? So I always ask, what accountant knows that I don't know, right? So those are the kind of questions I ask myself. So I think being curious is very, very important early on in your student career, right? I think your only job is to learn, right? You want to learn as much as you can. If you want to start a career in the project controls, start at very small, right? Just learn, for example, what is a schedule, right? How does it really work, right? And nowadays the information is there. If you want to learn anything, you can quickly Google or put in ChatGPT or any other AI agent, and you will get the information very back. So I think if you have a curiosity, you will find the information whatever you need in terms of the learning. Obviously, when you are transitioning from any other function to the project control, it's going to be slightly difficult because everybody, whenever you apply for a new position, they always want, do you have an experience or no? But there are a lot of companies they will offer you because project control professionals are in a short supply. They are very, very highly demanded project control professionals. So there are always opportunities, there are always companies. And when you really show your work to those companies, either online or through some sort of video content, things like that, I think you will be getting junior level positions immediately to start working. I never applied for any position. I just got curious about it. And when I was doing my piping design work, I got curious and I started supporting one of the planning engineer at the site myself. So I was doing like my work, and then in the evening, I used to sit with him and say, what can I do for you? And then he said, these are the activities. Can you help me to just type them in the Primavera, And that's how he used to just sit near me for 1-2 hours and I used to type them. And that's how I learned exploring what is the Primavera, And then I started reading something about Primavera, how the Primavera does, why they're using Primavera. So also doing things will really help you, and having curious mind, obviously.
That's a good advice. I feel like maybe Leonardo da Vinci would have been in project controls if he had been around. There's this profile of people maybe that are generalists and willing to say that they don't know what they don't know, because you kind of have to work. Project controls touches so many things. I feel like you have to be okay a little bit with you're sort of managing these areas that you might not have a full understanding of, but you're willing to learn and go a little bit deep on every piece that you need to. And that's great advice. I hope you encourage some folks to go into our space. And do you have any books, or you mentioned earlier Good to Great? Do you have any other books or professional associations that you would recommend people take a look at?
Yeah, there were a couple of books. Actually, it's on my desk. I was just trying to read. So I was just like a couple of 1 or 2 books which I'm currently reading. I think everybody might want to just check out. It's called Vedanta, right? It's a spirituality for leadership and success. So it's based on, when I went to last time to India, I got one copy and I was very interested because it connects the spirituality with the leadership. So it talks a lot about, and I think one of my favorite books so far is that it talks a lot about understanding yourself, right, before even doing anything. So it also have some sort of balance between inner peace and outer success. So it's not just like a leadership. Leadership is all about, outer success, but this really connects your spirituality with the leadership. So this is one of the favorite one. I think one other one which I like is the soul of the leadership, right?
Oh, cool.
Which is the Deepak Chopra's book. It's a pretty fascinating. It's a very iconic book. And obviously, if you want to read something about scientific stuff in terms of nature and in terms of the human behaviors and all, I think Thinking Fast and Slow is very, very popular, right?
Yeah.
It is Daniel Kahneman. So
that's a great
he's
book.
one of the noble. And apart from this, I read a lot of other books on the money in terms of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, things like that. Because somehow being a project controller is also you're managing money, right? At some point of time.
Yeah.
So unless you don't know how to manage your own money, how you can expect to manage somebody's money, right? So I think you have to really be well versed with managing money. So I read a lot of finance books in those areas. Yeah.
A really great tip. And then are you part of PMI? Are there other associations you like?
So there are a lot of great associations. So PMI is one of them, right? In the US, you have PMI and ACI, right? Those are the two great ones. In the UK, I am a chartered quantity surveyor. So I am a member of RICS, Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, the CIOB, the Chartered Institute of Buildings. And also because I did my law degree in a construction law, I'm also a member of Chartered Arbitrator Institution, CIARB, Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. So those are the three prominent ones when you talk about quantity surveying, construction management, and construction law in the UK.
Awesome. Those are really great tips and really inspiring to get this information. We'll definitely include links to these things down below in the comments section for anyone that's interested. And I just want to say, Tarun, thank you so much. It's been a really great discussion. Appreciate you taking us through one of the largest projects in the world, learning about leadership, learning about risk. Thank you. Thank you for coming on today.
It is true honor. And thank you so much, Orion, for inviting me. And it's a pleasure talking to you. And again, great meeting you. I mean, like-minded people. And thank you. Thank you so much.
And if anyone wants to get in touch with you, what is a great way for them to connect? Would it be following you on LinkedIn?
I think the best way is to find me on the LinkedIn. You can just type my name, TARUNGOHEL, and you can find me there. And I think all my contact details are there on the LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, and look forward to catching up with you perhaps on another episode.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Major Project Podcast. Be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts and learn more at themajorprojectpodcast.com. Until next time, keep building big.